Welcome to Clean Titan. Today, we're exploring an often overlooked aspect of environmental health, the importance of natural darkness. We're joined by Paul Bogard, author and associate professor whose work sheds light on the impact of light pollution. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Your book, The End of Night, brought depth attention to the issue of light pollution. What sparked your interest in this topic, and what do you hope readers take away from your work?
Yeah, it's a great question. What sparked my interest, I think, was growing up in Minnesota. I grew up in Minneapolis in a city, but we have a cabin on a lake in northern Minnesota, and so I grew up being up there a lot in the summer and sometimes in the winter. And I got to experience what we call real night and real darkness. That is natural darkness, very little light pollution, and a wonderful night sky. And so I like to say that that experience imprinted on me. It just became part of who I am. I learned to stand that this is what nighttime should look like, what it naturally looks like. And we can talk about this more later, but we're losing that experience now. But it wasn't until after college, actually, I was in either about to start graduate school or in graduate school, and I had always wanted to learn the constellations. I had always loved the night sky, but I had never learned the constellations. And I started to read about the constellations, and I realized that when I put the book down, because it was back in the days when you read about things from books, not necessarily from the internet, um, when I put the book down and went outside to see the constellations in the sky, I couldn't see them because of light pollution. And I looked around for writing about this, and I didn't find very much. It was an issue that hadn't been widely covered, and I took that as an opportunity and started to write about it. And eventually, that led to my first book, and Let There Be Night, which was actually an anthology where I asked people to write about this issue, and then from there to The End of Night, which is the book that I'm most well known for. And I guess your second question about what I hope people will take away, I think the number one is just to become aware of both the value of darkness for life on Earth, human life included, but also other animals. And this just our unnecessary overuse of artificial light. No one is, I'm certainly not saying that we shouldn't have light at nights. We'll have light at night. We like it. We want it. That kind of thing. It's just that we so often use way more of it than we need to use, and use it in ways that are kind of dumb. Shining light straight up into the sky is not making anyone any safer or really doing anything for anybody. But it does cause wasted energy use and harm to other animals. So I just want people to become aware, become educated, and to realize that the good news is light pollution is a problem that it's readily in our ability to solve. I was just talking to a class this morning about microplastics and how that problem is just how do we untangle something like that. But when it comes to light pollution, not that it's simple, but it is straightforward, and we could get started solving it just tonight.
Minneapolis is a beautiful place to grow up, especially in the summer.
Yes, absolutely.
And it's so sad that our children, they look up and they hardly see any of the stars that are out there.
I definitely think it's sad. I have a 6-year-old daughter, and at least she has a father and a mother, for that matter, who know what a real night sky looks like, and are try to expose her and try to give her the experience of nighttime and the night sky. But I think a lot of folks who are having kids now have never lived where they could really see the night sky. So in a way, you can't blame people for not paying attention to it. They just have never been exposed to it. I think I sometimes, this is an unscientific number, but I sometimes say if you're younger than 40, you've probably never lived in a place where you have really experienced natural darkness. It just doesn't, none of our cities, certainly, and our suburbs and even our small towns really don't give you the experience of what, for most of human history, was everywhere, was commonplace.
Can you explain the concept of light pollution and its various forms?
Yeah, absolutely. Light pollution is a phrase that we use to call attention to the wasted light, the overused light, the misused light. There are under that umbrella, there are terms we might use that people use to describe specific examples of light pollution. One is light trespass, where light from one property shines onto another property at night. This is one where, if you live in the US, you live in a country where people are obsessed with property rights. So it's just we build fences and we don't want people to trespass. But at night, we shine our lights all over the place. We don't, all that concern about property rights seems to go out the window. And I think a lot of people, when I give talks, for example, and I talk about how many of you have a neighbor's light or somebody's security light or yard light or something shining in your window at night, the number of people who raise their hand and have experience or have that experience is very high. It's very common. And it usually falls on the person whose house is being trespassed on to somehow buy blackout curtains or that kind of thing, rather than it being the responsibility of the person with the light to make sure that their light doesn't shine beyond their property. It feels backwards to me. So light trespass. Another one is sky glow, and this is everybody probably knows what it looks like. You've seen it 100 times, but maybe you've never really seen it, which is that kind of, especially on cloudy nights, you see all the clouds lit up. It's just that glow of light that's above any city or suburb or small town. Just the accumulated light that is either lights shining straight up into the air or bouncing off sidewalks or buildings and shining up. It's just the accumulated, again, wasted light shining up into the air. Another one that people recognize when you talk about it is glare. We have a big problem with glare. These are lights that are unshielded lights that are shining directly into your eyes. A really good example of this that everybody knows, and in a surprising way, it goes across the political spectrum. Everybody hates these lights, is the LED headlights that are frankly blinding when they're coming towards you. That's a great example of glare. And but we have way too much glary light from businesses, from signs in front of different buildings, street lights, all sorts of any light that's really unshielded, and allowing the light to shine in all directions is a candidate for glare. Light pollution is, again, kind of this umbrella term we use. Some people don't like the use of the word pollution, but I think for me it works because, again, it really points to this wasted resources. Light is a good thing. Artificial light is a miracle. It's a good thing. It's just it's the way that we use it that is unfortunate.
How does light pollution affect ecosystems and wildlife?
Dramatically. And I guess I would start by saying, as a biologist said to me a decade ago, he said, life on Earth evolved with bright days. We need light and dark nights. We need darkness. And I think that when I wrote The End of Night, so it was published, I guess, about 11 years ago. So I was doing the research in the year or two before that. The fields of research into the impacts on wildlife were nascent. They were very new, not a lot of studies. Since that time, we've had a lot more studies. We've learned a lot more about the impacts to wildlife. That said, there's still an enormous amount of work to be done that can be done. But I just go back to that original idea, which is that life evolved with bright days and dark nights. So even if we haven't specifically studied a certain organism or a certain species, you can almost bet that they have not evolved to experience light pollution or artificial light at night. Some of the most well-known or well-studied impacts include the impact on sea turtles. Sea turtles have evolved over hundreds of millions of years to crawl onto shore and lay their eggs. And when the hatchlings come up out of the sand, they have evolved over hundreds of millions of years to scurry toward the brightest light on the horizon, which through time has been the moon and the stars on the ocean. It's the direction you want to be heading if you're a sea turtle hatchling. But in the modern day, now the brightest light on the horizon is the hotel or the parking lot or the street light behind you on the beach, and it's the wrong way. You don't want to be headed that way. Only bad things are in that direction. We also know the impacts of light pollution on nocturnal migrating birds. The vast majority of birds in the world are migrants and nocturnal migrants. There's been a lot of great work done on that to show us that the numbers of migrating birds at night, and then to link their fate with light pollution. will draw them off course and disorient them. And a lot of the birds, the estimates are something like 1 billion birds a year in North America are killed by flying into glass. A lot of the birds that fly into the glass in the daytime were drawn into those urban areas by the lights at night. And so it contributes to that. But really, again, I think that just as we've found that exposure to artificial light impact human physical health, we can expect, and we're finding that it also impacts the physical health of other animals as well.
Your work highlights the connection between natural darkness and human health. Can you elaborate on the physiological and psychological aspects of artificial light at night?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is something that I think, again, I wish more people knew about. The physical level, it seems like there are some main things that we're concerned about. One is that exposure to artificial light at night disrupts our circadian rhythms. So, working the night shift, for example, has been labeled a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. So, a big part of that is the disruption of sleep, but also the exposure of artificial light at night. Speaking of sleep, we also know that exposure to artificial light contributes to sleep disorders, and sleep disorders are tied to every major disease that we're dealing with in modern life. We know that exposure to artificial light at night disrupts the production of melatonin in our bodies. And again, a lack of melatonin in the bloodstream has been linked to a higher risk for, say, prostate cancer. To work on these issues, wish that in some ways we could say, artificial light at night gives you cancer, because then people would pay attention. You can't say that there's not a direct link like that. But when you remember that human beings evolved with bright days and dark nights, and now we're being exposed to, something we've never evolved to experience, it makes sense that perhaps it's not good for us physically. We bodies have not evolved to experience all this light.
Poor sleep and less sleep has lots of consequences for our health, right?
Huge consequences. I remember talking to a guy named Stephen Lockley at Harvard. He's a sleep researcher at Harvard, and he said our understanding of sleep and the importance of sleep is where we were with understanding cigarette smoke in the 50s, essentially. Like we're on the cusp of being able to say this is lack of sleep, or the phrase they use is short sleep. Short sleep is as bad for us as smoking, in the 50s kind of thing, and again tied to depression, diabetes, obesity, on and on and on. Sleep is really important for our health, and artificial light at night gets in the way of that sleep. I think it's important too, the psychological aspect of it too, cutting ourselves off from the night sky. And I think in darkness and nights, the natural night, something that for all of human history has inspired us, has given us peace, has offered us perspective, just a lot when it comes to psychology, a lot of value in the night sky. I remember one of my favorite stories from when I was on the radio a lot talking about the end of night. A guy called in and said, I was a teenager, it were hard at home a lot of times and things got really rough. I would jump in my pickup and drive out to the edge of town and park and just climb up on the hood and lay back and, look up at the night sky. And he said, that's what saved me. That's what allowed me to have some perspective and to think that something more than this, there's something greater. And so many people just have no idea even exists. I really think as we're in a challenging century in a lot of ways, it's unfortunate we could really use this source of psychological goodness.
What are some of the less obvious consequences of losing natural darkness?
Yeah, I think some of the less obvious and most obvious consequence is that we can't see the stars. And I think that's where people start. When you talk about light pollution, people think that they think first about the stars, and rightly so. That's a good place to start. And then, as we've talked about before already, human health effects, the environmental costs, that kind of thing. Um, it's also a waste of money. People don't think about that. The extra light that's being used, the overuse of light that's being misused, that's shining up into the sky. It's all just wasted money. And unfortunately, in this country, at least, electricity is priced very cheaply. So we don't pay attention to it quite as much as we might as if we charged a realistic price for electricity. But it does cost money. certainly contributes to carbon emissions and therefore to climate change and all the costs that come to that, the burning of coal to create electricity, to turn on lights. And then I guess I would go back to this kind of psychological or even spiritual value of having access to night, to a natural night, to natural darkness, the night sky, but even the sounds and the sense and the feeling of just the experience of night. I think one of the most powerful ideas for me that I think about a lot is the idea of the extinction of experience. It was a phrase that was coined in the 90s, and into this the way that we usually think of extinction. I think we think of megafauna. We think of kinds that everybody knows, or birds that people have heard of, or that kind of thing. The passenger pigeon, or that kind of thing. But there is also this idea that we are also extinguishing experiences that used to be common. And I think that the experience of, as I like to say, walking out your door and coming face to face with the universe is an experience that for most of human history was common to everyone, at least on clear nights. And it is now one of the most rare experiences for people. Hundreds of millions of people have never seen the Milky Way, for example. And I would extend that by saying that a lot of people have never really or don't really get to experience the beauty of a natural night, what it feels like to be out in darkness, what it sounds like and smells like. Some people live in areas where they would be concerned or nervous about being out at night. But people who live in, let's just say, safer areas, for lack of a better term right now, are still, well, what I'm getting at is that we're afraid of the dark, essentially, and we've lost the experience of just being out at night and enjoying it. We don't really think about that as much, but there's a lot, that experience is a rich experience.
How does the loss of natural darkness contribute to the broader environmental crisis?
Yeah, I think you can look at it, the relationship, both ways. I think that the reason it is a symptom of the broader environmental crisis, the same reasons that we're disconnected from nature, that we're disconnected from the environment, are related to our disconnect from nighttime, for example, and from natural darkness. We're not aware of the value of natural darkness for life on Earth, for example. Nobody's ever told us that. But then I think it works the other way too, that a lack of awareness or appreciation or love for the night sky, for nocturnal animals, just for all the values of night, also contribute to the environmental crisis. It makes us less aware, it makes us less appreciative, it makes us less conscious of our way of life and how it's creating these problems. Sometimes people will say, you know, light pollution is a problem, but it's not that big of a problem, right? Like, should we care about light pollution when we've got all these other huge problems to deal with? And I like to say that that is true. So let's solve it, and then we can move on and solve these other things too, right? I think that tackling the problem of light pollution would be beneficial in so many ways. It's a win-win-win situation, but it would also be really highly symbolic of the way that we look at the rest of the world, right? If we are enlightened enough to solve light pollution, to use our lights thoughtfully and responsibly, I think that would be symbolic of a heightened awareness and appreciation and concern for the rest of nature.
What are some of the ways that light pollution interacts with climate change?
Well, I think to a certain extent, you just have that direct interaction. Burning of coal to produce electricity is probably the prime way. Unfortunately, don't have the numbers with me, and it's not as large as other sources, other large contributions to climate change. Um, but that symbolic piece to it, I think that an awareness of, funny to use the term, but becoming enlightened to light pollution or to the value of darkness, I think naturally would lead somebody to learn about climate and to want to take care of that. So I think they're interrelated that way. The other thing I would say is that light pollution is so unnecessary. And so at the same time, you have so many animals that are suffering from a changing climate and all the effects of that, depending on what species it is and where they are and that kind of thing. It can vary, but bearing the brunt of that. At the same time, they're, in some instances, barely hanging on, kind of surviving. We're also adding this wholly unnecessary burden of light pollution on top of it. We're making it even harder for them when things are already very hard, and it's so unnecessary. So I guess I would say that change is a huge, complex problem we need to address in many different ways. We don't need to make it worse by wasting our light, spraying our light all over the place at night.
In your book, Solastalgia, an anthology of emotion in a disappearing world, how does the feeling of solastalgia relate to light pollution?
Yeah, it's a great question. So solastalgia is a word that was coined by a guy named Glenn Albrecht, an Australian philosopher, about 20 years ago, as he began to hear from people who were emotionally and psychologically troubled by the devastation they saw of the landscape in New South Wales from the coal mine, the open pit coal mine operations. And he realized that when he looked around for language to talk about what this emotion that he was hearing from people, he felt like English language was lacking a term, and so he came up with this term that is combines the same root as solace with nostalgia, the pain. It's very like nostalgia, which is missing the pain of missing the past, someplace that we used to be. But solastalgia is, I think, in some ways even more powerful because it's the pain of missing what should be or where you still live, essentially. And so it refers to this feeling that so many people around the world are having, that you're not sad about the past, they're not sad about they haven't left home and they're missing home. They are still where they are in their home, but that home has changed or is changing because of environmental degradation, climate change, and other things, right? So the birds that always used to come are no longer coming, or the flowers that plants that used to grow don't grow anymore, or the animals that used to be common aren't common anymore. You're seeing those, or the in Minnesota, and 2 years ago we had a winter that was unlike any winter I've ever experienced in 50 years of being a Minnesotan. You had almost no snow, and it was warm all winter. This winter was a little bit more wintry, but not a lot. I mean, some of my friends are happy because it is a lot easier when it's like that. But for a lot of us, I think if you ask my friends or most Minnesotans, there's a sadness about realizing that the winter that we grew up with, that we've always known, is obviously, if you're paying attention, it's obviously fading. It's obviously going away. So Glenn Albrecht wanted a term that kind of referred to this pain of realization. And it's been remarkable. That word has spread all over the world. It's resonated for a lot of people. And I think that how it relates to light pollution is, for those of us who remember a time when had the experience of a real night sky, for example, or have been in alive in a time when a natural night was available to us, all the beauties, the sounds and the scents and the sights of a beautiful night, that we've lost that or are losing that is painful. The good thing about solastalgia is, I would argue, and I think Glenn Albrecht feels the same way, is that it is a powerful emotion, and it's nice to have a word for the ways that we're feeling, the pain that we're feeling. But it is grounded in our love for whatever you're talking about, our love for the place that we're missing, or love for the night sky that we're missing, or that kind of thing. And I think that the real power behind that concept is that it might help people to understand that what we love is we're losing what we love, and that it is oftentimes kind of a gradual loss, and it's slipping away, and we might want to pay attention to that and maybe put an end to it if we can.
How does the increasing reliance on artificial light relate to our energy consumption and the clean energy transition?
Well, I think to some extent, I think that light at night is a significant user of energy, but not a huge user of energy. So that said, I think you need to be doing everything we can to lower our energy use, and to cut our carbon emissions. And unlike some parts of our economy or part of our energy use that are difficult to do that, light pollution is relatively easy. It's something that we could take action on. Oftentimes it's as simple as switch, right? And you stop the use of that energy. I would go back to the symbolic nature of it too. A lot of your listeners will have seen, for example, just buildings that are all lit up at night in floodlights or power stations that are so bright at night. And it's kind of an ostentatious use of light, kind of wasteful, almost arrogant use of lights and energy that I think reflects an attitude about our use of energy. So as we transition to a clean energy economy, I think use of light at night can be have at least a small practical contribution toward that transition. And I think a very large symbolic piece of that transition, really would show our attention to the problem and our commitment to doing something about it, to use our light more thoughtfully and responsibly.
What are some of the energy efficient lighting technologies that can help reduce light pollution?
Well, the definitely the newest development when it comes to lighting and therefore light pollution is the advent of the light emitting diode. We've moved from if you go way back, we've moved from oil lamps to gas lamps to electric lighting, which people are familiar with. Now we're moving to electronic lighting. And I remember when I was researching the end of night, I was talking to an astronomer in Italy, northern Italy, and he said he used the phrase tsunami of LEDs. At the time, I really didn't write about it that I didn't write about LEDs that much in the end of night, and again, that was barely over a decade ago. We're just showing up. He could already kind of see what was coming, but since then, it truly has been a tsunami. I would say every large city in the US, I can't imagine there's not a city in the US that hasn't already transitioned their streetlights, for example, to LED streetlights. Almost always it is because of the energy savings that could be realized. The danger with, and I'm not an expert on lighting or energy efficiency necessarily, but I know that the danger with using LED lighting that should be more efficient, they are by definition more efficient, is that we are tempted to use more of them. And so that's a problem. You only realize, I think, the efficiency of the thing if you continue to kind of at the same level you were before, but you're more efficient with it rather than just kind of more of it because it's cheaper or more efficient. That doesn't make sense. And so the advent of LEDs have contributed to light pollution, and there's a relationship there between energy and light pollution. In that, rather than sort of realizing the possibilities of LEDs, the fact that you can program them with a computer, you can sit at a laptop and control the lights around the city, raise them and lower them. They're very adaptable and exciting in that way. Rather than really realize that, we've just made everything brighter. Because they're more efficient, we can use them more without spending more money. We'll just use more light. And that obviously has made the problem of light pollution just get worse.
But there are some flat LEDs and directional LEDs that reduce the amount of light that goes up towards the sky, and they have black coverings on top, so the amount of pollution in the goes up north and goes in the direction of south where it's needed.
That's right. That has been one good thing, right? LEDs are much more directional. They're oftentimes shielded. You can put the actual light source up in the fixture, and so they just shine down. The problem, though, sometimes is that again, if your level of light is brighter than it was, you're still going to create a lot of light, and that light might bounce off the sidewalk or bounce off the street or bounce off the snow or that kind of thing. And so, even though you're absolutely right that the shielding is a positive thing, you don't have LEDs sort of shining in all directions as often as you would a electric light. The fact that they're that much brighter has taken away some of the positive effects of that shielding.
Smart city initiatives often involve increased lighting for safety and convenience. How can we balance these needs with the preservation of natural darkness?
Well, I think your question kind of speaks to that. We talk about safety and convenience. Are those needs or are they desires, right? The issue of safety is a big one for anybody who deals with light pollution and light at nights. The fact is that we like light, as I said at the beginning. Light makes us feel safer, even if it really doesn't. I mean, on its own, it doesn't do anything to make us safer. In all my talks, I show images of how light, especially unshielded bright light, glary light, makes it harder for you to see at night. Your pupils close down. It creates shadows where the bad guy can hide. Um, and I think worst of all, it creates the illusion of safety. People see bright lights and they think it's safe, but again, lights alone don't make you safe, right? And I think it's you have to acknowledge that by and large, as a culture, we're afraid of the dark. We think darkness is dangerous. We think dark areas are dangerous, and we think light areas are safe. And so, because some light can help us be safer and more secure, we think ever more light can make us ever more safe and secure. So when we think about modern cities, smart cities, sustainable cities, all those things, I think wish that we would really think about how much light do we really need? Where do we need it? When do we need it? And that kind of thing, rather than continuing to kind of use more light than we need and in ways that actually a lot of times take away from safety. If you're trying to encourage pedestrian, more walking, for example, or more biking and that kind of thing, but you still allow, you create areas where it's hard to see because those walkers or those bikers, because there's lots of glary lights, lots of light pollution. People are not going to want to walk or bike in those areas because they'll be dangerous, even though there's a lot of light. So I think the relationship isn't always as straightforward as we think it might be. And convenience is the same thing. When I hear the word convenience, I think of, want things easier. We want them whenever we want them. Gas stations lit up very brightly at night, for an example of that. We just feel safer. We're drawn to the light, but it contributes to all these costs that we've talked about when it comes to light pollution.
We're good about creating illusions, right?
No doubt.
What are some best practices for designing urban lighting that minimizes light pollution?
Well, I think it begins again with thinking about, do we really need lights? Want lights? How much do we need? When do we need it? That asking those questions, and then thinking about how can we be good neighbors? How can we light in ways that are thoughtful, that are beautiful? Right? I think it's remarkable the number of cities or towns, certainly in this country, that spend money to make themselves attractive during the day, and then at night they're just blasting light all over the place, and it's quite ugly. The example of Paris, which overall is still a very bright city, and from space it's really bright, but here. Thousands of tourists go there to see the city of lights. Beautiful, the way that they light their buildings. They've spent several decades relighting the whole city to create the ambiance that draws people from all over the world. So we can create beauty with our artificial light at night as well. Remind me of what you originally asked. I got kind of lost in the haze of thinking about Paris at night there.
That's easy to do. What are some best practices for designing urban lighting that
Yeah.
minimize light pollution?
Yeah, so along with those kind of principles that I mentioned, I think best practices would be certainly being conscious of the direction of the light. So wanting to shield the light so that the light goes down only where we need it. It's not going up into the sky. It's not shining horizontally. It's not creating glare, that kind of thing. Not using more light than we need. Thinking about beauty, all those things. How can you light spaces in a way that invite people in rather than push them away? That kind of thing. And I would point to the organization Dark Sky International. It used to be the International Dark Sky Association, but Dark Sky International has done a lot of work to help people understand these best practices and kind of them accessible to anybody who's interested in thinking about how would we do this.
Some cities, I think, are experimenting with ordinances to turn off some lights at night.
Sure, and the example I often list is everybody knows the Eiffel Tower, and the Eiffel Tower. I think it's 1 o'clock. It might be midnight. Lights go off on the Eiffel Tower. So if Paris and the Eiffel Tower can do it, there have been a number of more practical, a number of, for example, villages, small cities, small towns in England. I know have experimented with this, and It's almost comical. It's one of those things that if it wasn't a serious problem, you would laugh. But I think people really kind of that if you turn off the lights or reduce the lighting at night, that suddenly criminals will come out of the woodwork and the streets or that kind of thing. And what they've found in every case that I know of, I really haven't heard a story of where somebody, a city or town or village instituted some form of turning off the lights at night for primarily for energy use. Honestly, I can't think of a single story where they've seen a rise in crime, and I've actually heard a number of stories where I've seen a lowering of crime or no change. And it reminds me that something somebody said to me in London. I think they said you have to remember that criminals are as afraid of the dark as the rest of us. That might be true. Who knows? Maybe that's the reason. So.
I was in Las Vegas and the innovation head was talking about putting in smart lights that would be turned on at a very low level until a car or a pedestrian approached them. And then they would go back to a low level. Or, national parks were restricted areas, they would be at very low level unless there's a trespasser, and then they'll brighten up where there's a trespasser. So there are some technologies that can help.
Absolutely. That has worked for a lot of people are just the detect lights that, depending on your circumstance could be an ideal solution. And then, yeah, when it comes especially again to LEDs, they really give us the opportunity to do some really innovative things. I know that when I was in Paris researching the end of night, I was talking with one of the guys who was in charge of what they were doing was figuring out, really trying to understand in the city where people are at night and when, so that they could program the lights to mesh with that. So if people are out and about, the lights would be a little bit higher. And if there's nobody there, then, let's lower the lights or turn the lights off. One of the slides that I use in my slideshow is a picture of a parking lot. It's a Target parking lot in Virginia where I used to work. And it's after midnight and it's empty. And there hasn't been anybody there for 2 or 3 hours since the store closed. But the lights are still on as bright as they were, at 6 or 7 or 8 o'clock at night when there were people there. That's a real opportunity, it seems to me, to we can do better than that. We have the technology. We just need to become aware of it, change our thinking, and take care.
How can individuals and communities advocate for policies and practices that reduce light pollution?
Well, the good thing is that they can. It goes back to that of this is a problem we can solve. I always tell people kind of what communities are you part of? Part of a business, part of a school, part of a place of worship. Are you part of a suburb, a town? Your communities, and then try to influence the lighting at that level. Sometimes, oftentimes, you can make change at that level that would be significant. Other times, when I lived and taught in Virginia, street lighting was controlled by Dominion Energy, the state utility kind of thing. So, different level of engagement, but you still have the lights on your house, you have the lights on your other communities that you could affect. A lot of people who make decisions about lighting are not really well educated about issues of light pollution, the costs of light pollution and the solutions. Give them the benefit of the doubt and say it's no fault of their own. They just haven't learned. So I think there's an opportunity for people to raise these issues and to say these are the many costs and these are the solutions and these are the ways that will benefit from controlling light pollution and kind of advocate for those solutions. As I said before, I think controlling light pollution in any community is a win-win. Energy costs, you cut carbon emissions, you protect the environment, bring back the stars, all these things. There's really real good argument for not trolling this problem. You'll have to deal with the fact that people are afraid of the dark, and they'll be afraid that if we do something with the lights, that more crime will happen or we'll get sued, right? And you just have to engage with those fears. I think ultimately this is an issue that I like to work with because people can do something about it at whatever level or in whatever community they're part of.
What are some of the successful initiatives that have been implemented to protect natural darkness?
Well, the two prime examples that I always point to are in Arizona, the cities of Flagstaff and Tucson that have created really effective lighting ordinances for those cities that have kept the level of lights lower than comparably sized cities elsewhere. And they've done this, the night sky for the observatories, either Flagstaff, it was about Lowell Observatory, which is on a hill, right, kind of middle of town or just on the edge of town. Tucson, it's for observatories that are, a desert a ways, but still the lights of Tucson rob sky. So I think those are really great examples of major American cities that have been effective in keeping the light pollution low. And it shows that we can do it. There's no reason that other cities can't do it. I would also point to the national parks and the Park Service as a success story. The have been very successful. A lot of the parks have the buildings there have lowered their lighting level and instituted programs, ranger programs, astronomy programs that have really shared the night sky and the cost from light pollution with lots and lots of people. So that's a powerful, positive example. More recently, I know that the city of Pittsburgh has passed really kind of forward looking legislation around artificial light at night. And so that is a good lesson. One of the best practices is to be proactive about lighting. Because one of the obstacles to tackling light pollution is that people will say, "Well, the lights we have work. Why should we change them?" One of the tactics you can take is to say, "All right, allow these to work until they stop working, and then you have to replace them with energy efficient shielded lighting, proactive," or to say, you know rules in the books now that ensure that whatever lights are installed in the future don't add to the problem. I think that's a thing that can do as well.
How does the loss of the night sky affect our connection to nature?
Well, I think again, it's one of those, the relationship goes both ways. The loss of the night sky reflects a lack of connection to nature. We're just oblivious to it. We're disconnected. We don't pay attention. We don't learn about it, all those things. And so we blast our lights into the sky and we can't see the stars, right? But I think also wanting to learn the constellations and realizing I couldn't see the stars, I think that when you have the experience of seeing the Milky Way, for example, or seeing a beautiful night sky, or having an experience where you're watching the moon rise or listening to migratory birds go overhead or turtles come in from the ocean or all these things that happen at night that are beautiful and powerful, it sparks something in you. And I think that it can help reconnect you or connect you to nature in general in a way that during the day we're consumed with responsibilities, jobs, kids, whatever it is. But then at night, maybe we have that opportunity to be inspired again and to realize our connection to nature.
How can we encourage people to reconnect with the natural world, including the night sky?
Well, I think education is a huge part of it. Introducing people to, at some level, just showing people pictures of the night sky and saying, "Have you ever seen this? Isn't it beautiful?" Telling them about all the nocturnal animals that depend on darkness, life, how the world comes alive at night, that kind of thing. But then, of course, I think the main way is to get people out at nights. There's nothing like going for a night hike under a full moon or peering at distant objects, seeing Saturn through a telescope, or just sitting on the dock at a lake under a night sky or watching a thunderstorm. All these experiences, we talked before about the extinction of experience. And I think that just being outside at nights goes a long way to encouraging connection with nature. It is, for me, I think the wild world comes alive at nights. And literally, I know studies have shown that in many cases, in many places, animals are learning to hide during the day and come out at nights. And then you add all the nocturnal and crepuscular species that have evolved to depend on darkness. It really, night is increasingly the time when the wild world comes alive. And I think being part of that helps us create a connection.
What are the most promising developments in reducing light pollution and restoring natural darkness?
Well, I think the biggest thing is just more people know about it. I remember, years ago when I was researching the end of night, some of the people I talked to had been active for a long time advocating for against pollution said, a lot of people they talked to had never heard those two words together, light and pollution, phrase that hadn't heard. I think we've come a long way from that. I think a lot of people now have heard of light pollution and have some general standing of what it is. And then I think we've had, things that I've mentioned already, this growth of Dark Sky International. They and other organizations have designated dark sky places around the world to draw attention to the protection of darkness. I think that's been significant. I think the National Park Service and the work the Park Service has done has been significant. More and more cities and suburbs and towns and villages are adopting, ordinances, trying to get a handle on overuse and misuse of light at night. So there are a lot of stories of success at all different levels, and I think it just nobody to tell the pilgrims or the first Europeans about like when they got here, that's all they saw was wilderness, and now we've evolved to have a wilderness protection system, a places areas where we've protected to make sure that it doesn't disappear. I think the same thing is true with nighttime and with the stars. It's, 100 years ago, the idea of protecting darkness or the night sky would have seemed absurd because it's everywhere. But we've reached a point now where, and fairly rapidly, we have to take action if we want to pass along a night sky to our children.
What are the biggest challenges in raising awareness about light pollution and implementing effective solutions?
I honestly think the number one, well, lack of education to go off what I was just saying, that people don't know either the costs of light pollution or the value of natural darkness. We increase our well being physically, mentally, spiritually by tackling light pollution and engaging with natural darkness. So just that lack of knowledge about it is a big one. And the other big one that comes to mind is just our fear of the dark. It sounds basic, but I just think there's a real you can talk for an hour about the costs of light pollution and the value of natural darkness, and people will say, yeah, but we need all this light for safety and security. I think that isn't true. As I said, at start, like lights that are shining into the sky are not making anybody any safer or more secure, right? At some very basic level, we're afraid of the dark. We think bad things, bad and darkness go together, goodness and light go together, et cetera, et cetera. That is a really hard thing to overcome, to help people understand that we can have thoughtful, intelligent, even beautiful light at night, and it doesn't have to be blasting all over the place. We'll be just as safe, probably safer actually, because people can see better, will be more conscious and aware, all those things. People just think more light equals more safety. We got to have more light. And that's not true.
For individuals and communities looking to make a difference, what practical steps do you recommend?
Well, again, I think doing everything you can to raise awareness, to raise education, talk with friends. I live in a neighborhood in Minneapolis where most of my neighbors, we turn our lights off at night, leave our lights shining on all night long. There's no reason to. There's street light. And so talking to your neighbors, raising awareness, again, working in the communities that you're part of. I just heard from somebody who's reading my book who said he lives in Colorado. He's a cyclist. He likes to ride at night, go biking at night. And he read the book, got inspired, and gave a talk to his cycling group about light pollution. And I think we're all part of communities. We all have friends. And I think that we have an influence. And realize that at the civic level, cities, states, government, that kind of thing, to work toward ordinances, to work towards laws that favor good lighting, intelligent lighting. There's plenty of work to be done. There's good work to be done and lots of successes to be had. I think, like I said, this is a win-win.
How can we foster a greater appreciation for the value of natural darkness?
I mean, that's where the experience comes in at night, is how do you foster appreciation? You experience it. So if you're a parent, you share the beauty of night with your child in a place where you can take family members or other groups or friends even out to enjoy the nights. That's the thing to do too. I think people appreciate things when they can experience night and darkness. We need to have positive experiences with them since we have so many messages in our society saying night and darkness are bad and dangerous. The power of going out and having a positive experience is great.
Paul, this has been an incredibly enlightening conversation. Your work highlights the importance of preserving natural darkness for both environmental and human well being. Thank you for sharing your insights with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure to talk with you.
And to our viewers, thank you for joining us on Clean Titans. Don't forget to subscribe and follow us for more insights into the clean energy transition and environmental sustainability. Until next time, keep looking up and appreciating the night sky. And if you have any questions or suggestions, please ask in the comments and tell your friends about Clean Titans. Thank you.